Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. For the past 18 months, Democrats in the Congress and their PR consultants in the press have told you that Donald Trump won the 2016 presidential election, mostly because his campaign somehow colluded with the government of Vladimir Putin. To prove that, they have brought the usual business of government here in Washington basically to a standstill and launched the most divisive special counsel investigation in the history of the country. It has now gone on for more than a year. And yet, remarkably, to this very day, we still have no proof of collusion. Just this weekend, Democrat Mark Warner of the Senate Intel Committee, who is someone everybody in Washington pretends is impressive, was offered a chance on television to provide actual evidence of Russian collusion. He declined. Of course he did. They always do. You've seen this before, but tonight we have something different for you. We have a Democrat who says he has the smoking gun. 3 months ago, we made this offer to Congressman Eric Swalwell of California, who is a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Watch. If you have any evidence at all of collusion, any, and I don't care how small it is, I will give the floor to you, and I mean that, because I want to wrap this up. I'm sure you do too. So we offered the congressman a full half hour live on this show if he could give us evidence, real evidence, of Russian collusion by Trump's campaign. And to his credit tonight, he is taking us up on that offer. There is nothing staged about this conversation, the one you're about to see. If the congressman has proof that Trump people colluded with a hostile foreign power, we will be the first to call for indictments. But if he doesn't have that proof, if after all this time there is still no real evidence of collusion, then we will know for certain that this whole thing is a lie that has badly damaged our country. We're going to find out in just a minute. Meanwhile, the Russia investigation continues to expose deep and terrifying corruption in Washington, and not in the ways the people who launched it expected. On Friday, the New York Times and the Washington Post reported that the Obama administration employed a spy who posed as an advisor to the Trump campaign during the 2016 election. He was a longtime CIA asset who fed information back to federal intelligence agencies. The Obama people lied about doing this, but they did it. As far as we know, nothing like that has ever happened in American history. Richard Nixon was accused of less than that, and he left office. So you'd think the self-described guardians of democracy in the media would be horrified by the suggestion of partisan spying, no matter what they think of Trump personally. But they're not horrified. Instead, they're aggressively defending it like the craven lackeys they are. The Washington Post over the weekend actually ran an op-ed with this headline. We're not making this up. Quote, "The FBI didn't use an informant to go after Trump. They used one to protect him." Amazingly, the New York Times agreed with that. Here was its story in the subject. Quote, "FBI used informant to investigate Russia ties to campaign, not to spy." In other words, Donald Trump should be grateful that Obama's FBI spied on him. It was for his own good. The people who wrote this crap should be ashamed. It's not journalism. It's partisan cheerleading. It's also embarrassingly credulous. Just transcribe whatever spin you got from your FBI source and call it a news story. How would these idiot reporters feel if the Trump administration read their emails or tapped their cell phones or sent a spy to spy on them and then claimed it was all for their own good? Well, obviously, they'd be outraged, and so would we, because we're not hacks. Obama's CIA director, John Brennan, by contrast, is a hack. He's also a liar who's done more to embarrass and discredit the so-called intelligence community than any other single person. Brennan has been on Twitter attacking Trump and anyone else who wants to know more about the Obama administration's spying efforts in the last campaign, as if Americans don't have a right to know when their government is spying on them and why. Our ruling class is completely out of control. That's the real lesson of this Russian nonsense. And for the latest details, we're joined by Byron New York of the Washington Examiner and George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley. Professor, first to you. Does the public, do Americans, have a right to know if they were spied on and why?
I think that they do. I mean, these are very serious allegations, and they are unprecedented. You know, we don't know what the truth is. Maybe there was a valid reason for the investigation. Maybe they used valid means. But we should want to know. I mean, what I think is being a case of willful blindness here is that we have confirmation that Trump apparently was correct when he said over a year ago that he had people in his campaign that were under surveillance. It turns out that it was much broader than we thought, even though people like Clapper and others in the Obama administration denied it. It does appear to be a surveillance program. It does appear to be an investigation. And now you have an individual who reportedly offered to be an advisor in a campaign when he was an asset for the FBI or the CIA or both. I can't imagine what justice official would sign off on that. Now, you can try to split this as you may, whether this is an investigation or surveillance. But from Trump's standpoint, there's a legitimate issue. You can tell a victim that this isn't a mugging; it's just a forced divestiture. But it sure feels like a mugging unless you can prove to the contrary.
If Bush had done this to Obama, I would want to know why. And I think it's fair to want to know. So what do we know, Byron? You've been reporting on this. When did this start?
Well, the emergence of this informant has kind of thrown into doubt our previous timetable of this. Remember, we've always been told that the FBI investigation formally started on July 31st. They wrote up something called the electronic communication. It started this investigation. But now we hear that the informant was actually reaching out and talking to Trump campaign people well before that, at least weeks before that, maybe longer before that. And I think what you're seeing on Capitol Hill is some investigators, Republican investigators, are looking even further back than that.
So what would that mean? That he was doing it unilaterally because he was interested, or that he was doing it at the direction of one of the Obama agencies?
Well, that he was doing it at the direction of an agency before they had a pretense, a pretext to actually do this. So that would be a big issue inside the FBI. Also, we're seeing some investigators looking even further back to March. On March 21st, Trump goes to the Washington Post, meets with their editorial board. Remember, he was under a lot
very well.
Under a lot of criticism for not having a group of foreign policy advisors, in part because the entire Republican foreign policy establishment had shunned him. And they asked him, well, who are your advisors? He pulls a piece of paper out of his pocket and says, well, here they are. And he reads off a list. And on the list are Carter Page and George Papadopoulos. And we know now that James Comey and Andrew McCabe personally briefed the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, about them. Back then, that's in March, and then shortly thereafter, they were discussed at what's called the National Security Council Principals Committee, which is Secretaries of State, Treasury, Defense, CIA. All these people are talking about Carter Page then.
Totally shocking. Professor, quickly, since you've got more historical perspective on this than most people, is this without precedent? If true, has anything like this ever happened that we know of?
I know of no precedent to support this. Now, they have a case to make. The point, though, is for those people that are objecting, what are you objecting to? I mean, this is a serious matter. No matter how you feel about Trump, we need to find out the truth about this. If there was an investigation of an opposing political party, if there was an asset who tried to become an advisor in the campaign, those are all serious matters for all of us. And I think that Trump is right. He went about it, I think, in the wrong way. But he has a legitimate objection here that we should know the true facts.
Well, I agree, and I don't think it's about Trump at all. Thank you both very much. I appreciate it. Glenn Greenwald is co-founder and editor at The Intercept, and he joins us tonight. You're not a Trump supporter. I don't think this is about Trump. I think it's about oversight of our intel and law enforcement agencies. What do you think of the coverage, which you've been following closely, of this alleged mole in the campaign?
It's incredibly bizarre, Tucker, because for the last 2 weeks, all we heard from the FBI, and of course the media reported it uncritically, was that it was extremely dangerous to try and expose or determine the identity of this informant, because to do so would be to jeopardize his life, the life of other people, national security, all the things they always say when they want to hide from the public what it is that they do. And now that the New York Times and the Washington Post published huge amounts of details about this informant, making it incredibly easy to know that it was Stephen Halper, because the Daily Caller 2 days earlier had reported all the same details and named him. We all now know who the informant is, and we know that that was just a fairy tale, that he's not some covert undercover agent, but somebody who's a well-known CIA operative, whose name has been repeatedly published in newspapers as a CIA operative and as a Republican operative for decades. And so the whole claim that the media was circulating on behalf of the FBI that this was some sensitive covert asset turned out to be a lie, and the New York Times and Washington Post knew that, which is why they did everything but name him by publishing all of the details to let us know who it is.
But it wasn't just the media. I mean, you saw Mark Warner of Virginia, who's on the Senate Intel Committee, who's seen as a pretty sober person, basically threaten his colleagues with criminal prosecution if they in any way divulge the identity. What would be the justification for that?
This is what the intelligence community does, Tucker, and I've been trying to essentially make this point for 18 months now, as we've been told we're required patriotically to accept whatever it is that they say. I spent 3 years reporting on the NSA. They constantly said that it would be a crime if we divulged this information, that it would endanger people. As we reported on it, nobody was ever hurt. They were trying to cover themselves and their own wrongdoing and not the national security of the country. And that's the same here. You have people like Mark Warner and inside of the FBI and Justice Department who don't want us to know the name of the informant, not because they're worried about national security, but because they're worried about themselves. And that's why they're using the language they always use. You're going to be engaged in espionage. You're going to be jeopardizing lives. This is what they always say. And the reason why I think the media deserves criticism is because the media knows better than anybody that when they say that, they're in the vast majority of cases lying and trying to cover for themselves. And that's why it's so important that we keep digging.
I remember your NSA reporting well, and I apologize to you for not taking it more seriously at the time. You were right. And anyway, I'm grateful that you're doing it, and thank you for being one of the last remaining civil libertarians. Glenn Greenwald, I appreciate it.